Salam and peace be upon you. My name is Muhammad Layak Siddiqui, the father of Holophase. Episode 6, Part 9. Remember the language we are learning together. There is one field called phi, spelled Phi. Phi is the holophase, a cyclic rhythm defined at every point in the universe. Its first derivatives give us three simultaneous echoes: time, which we call omega, spelled Omega, space, which we call K, the spatial pattern, and motion, which we call V, built from both omega and K. Above them, higher derivatives form a branching tree that in principle goes on forever. Every law of nature is a pattern in this tree of derivatives of phi. In this part of our journey, we will zoom into one branch of that tree, the philosophy of a phi-closed universe. Welcome to part 9 of episode 6. By now, you have already met phi as the silent root of reality. You have seen the master tree, that glowing branching diagram where phi sits at the root and all its derivatives rise upward like branches of a living language. You have heard that the universe might not be built from many ingredients, but from one continuous script written in this single field. In this part, we are going to ask a deeper question. What does it actually mean if that is true? What changes in our understanding of reality and of ourselves if everything is just phi and its patterns? To get there, we will move slowly, in long, calm steps. Imagine that you are walking through a landscape at dusk. The light is soft, shapes are still clear, but they are beginning to blur into a single scene. That is what we are going to do with your ontology, with your picture of what there is. We are going to soften the edges between things and show you that underneath there is one continuous fabric, the fabric of phi. Let us start with something simple you already know in your bones. When you stand on a hill, your body never feels absolute height. Your legs do not whisper, "You are 123 meters above sea level." What you feel is slope. You feel the way your weight leans downhill. You feel the strain in your muscles as they hold you against gravity. In other words, your body feels derivatives. It measures differences in height between nearby points, not the absolute number printed on a map. The same is true with sound. Take a melody you love. You can sing it higher or lower, but as long as the distances between the notes are the same, it is still recognizably the same song. The meaning of the melody does not live in any one absolute pitch. It lives in the intervals between notes. You can raise every note by the same amount, and the melody survives intact. This is exactly like adding a constant to phi everywhere. If you shift phi by the same amount at every point, nothing observable changes. The song of the world sounds the same. So here is the first philosophical punchline. The universe does not care about absolutes. It cares about differences. It cares about derivatives. In the language of phi, all the physically meaningful quantities are built from how phi changes in time and space, not from its raw value. That raw value can slide around the circle freely. We call this global shift symmetry. You can imagine phi as a hand on a clock that can be rotated for the entire universe at once. The absolute angle does not matter. What matters is how quickly it turns, how it differs between here and there, between now and then. This already hints at a radical conclusion. In a phi-closed universe, nothing exists as a sealed, independent chunk. Everything that is real is a pattern of relations. Every bit of information is a relationship between at least 2 points, or 2 moments, or 2 directions in the field. If phi were absolutely constant everywhere, with no differences at all, there would be nothing. No time, no space, no motion, no light, no matter, no you. There would be pure potential, but no pattern. Reality begins the moment phi starts to vary. When phi changes in time at a point, we call that change omega. You can imagine omega as the rate at which the local phase of the universe turns. When phi changes in space, we call that pattern k, a vector that tells you how the phase tilts as you move through space. Where omega and k come together, you can define v, the motion of phase patterns, the velocity at which the features of phi move. So a tiny change in phi over time and space gives you three coordinated echoes: time as omega, space as k, and motion as v. Every real phenomenon, from the swing of a pendulum to the orbit of a planet, is written in these echoes and their higher order refinements. To make this less abstract, imagine a rug being woven. At first, you see only neutral thread. As the weaver works, loops and knots appear. Patterns emerge. Flowers, borders, repeating motifs all arise from the same thread being pulled, twisted, and knotted in different ways. Now imagine zooming in on a single flower in the rug. That flower feels like a thing. But ontologically, at the deepest level, there is no separate flower substance. There is only thread, arranged in a particular pattern. In a phi-closed universe, everything is like that flower. The thread is phi, the weaving is the dynamics of phi, the way it changes. The pattern is the derivative structure, how phi varies from point to point, from moment to moment. A particle is a tiny stable motif in that pattern. A planet is a larger, more complex motif. A galaxy is an enormous whirling design. None of them are made of different ingredients. They are all expressions of the same field, differing only in how the pattern of phi and its derivatives is shaped. This view is very different from the familiar picture we inherit from textbook physics. In the usual story, the universe is made of particles or fields moving in a fixed container called spacetime, obeying laws that live in some separate, abstract arena. In the phi story, the container is no longer separate. The particles are no longer made of a different substance. The laws are no longer external rules. There is only one thing, phi and its behavior. Space-time, particles, and laws are all different aspects of its pattern. Let us look first at time. In everyday thinking, time is like an invisible river. We picture everything as floating downstream in that river, from past to future. The river is there whether we are looking at it or not. It seems like we are objects moving through time. But in phi ontology, time is not a river outside phi. Time is the music of phi itself. At each point in the universe, phi is a cyclic angle. Imagine a tiny clock hand living at that point, spinning around a circle. The rate at which that hand turns is what we call omega. Where omega is constant, the local rhythm is steady. Where omega varies, time is effectively stretched or compressed. There is no single external ticking metronome. There is a field of local ticking rates. The tapestry of time is woven from all of those local rhythms of phi. This idea is not as foreign as it sounds. You already know the different processes have different internal times. Waiting for a kettle to boil can feel much longer than talking with a friend, even if the clock says the same number of minutes passed. Part of that is psychology, but in a deeper sense, it reflects that different systems have different internal rates of change. In the phi picture, those internal rates are literally different omega landscapes, different regions of the field where phi spins at different speeds. Time becomes relative not just in the sense of Einstein, but in the sense that all time is an echo of change itself. Now look at space. We usually imagine space as a three-dimensional grid, an empty box with coordinates x, y, and z. Things sit at these coordinates like beads on a wire. But in the phi story, space is not an empty container waiting to be filled. Space is the pattern of phi laid out across the universe. The quantity that measures how phi changes as you move through space is called k. You can think of k as a little arrow at each point, telling you in which direction phi increases the fastest and how steeply. Where the magnitude of k is large, the phase changes quickly over short distances. The pattern is fine-grained, with tight stripes or sharp structures. Where the magnitude of k is small, the phase changes slowly and the pattern is smooth and broad. Instead of imagining space as a blank grid, imagine it as a huge painting of waves. At every location, the color and texture of the wave pattern is determined by phi. Positions are no longer just labels on an empty stage. They are defined by where you are in that pattern. When you say, the object is here, what you are really saying is that a certain distinctive phase pattern surrounds this region, distinct from the pattern somewhere else. Space becomes a web of relationships in phi, not an independent structure. Motion, the third echo, fits naturally into this picture. In the usual way of thinking, motion is what happens when objects change position in space over time. But in a phi universe, motion is what happens when patterns travel through the field. Think again of waves on water. The water molecules themselves mostly move up and down. The crest of the wave, that bright line of maximum height, travels horizontally. The crest is not a separate piece of water. It is a moving shape, a pattern that the water continuously recreates as it sways. Motion in phi is the movement of such patterns. The quantity we call v is the velocity of the phase features. You can think of v as the speed and direction you would have to move so that the phase value of phi you are sitting on stays the same. In more technical language, v is built from omega and k, encoding how time change and space change fit together to make a moving pattern. But for our audio journey, you can simply remember this. V is the way phi draws moving shapes across itself. Once you see motion as pattern transport, the world looks different. Instead of stuff flying around in a stage, you see patterns gliding through a medium. Light is a self-propagating phase pattern. An orbiting planet is a stable pattern in a curved phase landscape. Even your walking across a room is the unfolding of a particular pattern of phi interacting with the rest of the field. At this point, something important happens to our concept of substance. The traditional picture says there are substances, like matter and energy, which occupy space and endure through time, and they obey laws. In the phi picture, substance, space, time, and law are all re-expressed as aspects of phi's derivative structure and dynamics. Substances become stable patterns in the field. Space and time become large-scale patterns in the field. Laws become regularities in how those patterns evolve. To exist in this ontology is to be expressible as a pattern in phi. The derivative atlas, the complete catalog of how phi can change, becomes the dictionary of existence. If a phenomenon cannot be described in terms of phi and its derivatives, it does not belong to this universe. If it can, then it is literally made of the same foundational stuff as everything else. Now let us bring this very close to you. In a phi-closed universe, who are you? You are not a mysterious soul floating above physics, nor just a pile of inert atoms. You are a pattern in phi. Not a frozen pattern, but a dynamic, self-maintaining, self-revising pattern. Think of a whirlpool in a river. The water molecules are always changing. They flow in and flow out. But the whirlpool remains recognizable for some time. It is a stable configuration in the flow. You are like that, but vastly more complex. Your body, your brain, your memories, your habits, your personality, all of it is a colossal, layered arrangement of phase patterns, distributed across space and time, that manages to hold itself together and even talk about itself. This way of seeing identity as pattern continuity is both humbling and elevating. It is humbling because it shows that you are not a separate exception to physical reality. You are not a ghost trapped in a machine. You are the machine's most intricate pattern. It is elevating because it shows that your existence is not crude or accidental. Maintaining such a pattern is incredibly non trivial. It means that for decades, the holophase field has been weaving and reweaving you as a complex motif in the cosmic rug. Before we close, it is worth staying a little longer with this idea of differences rather than absolutes, because it underpins the entire holophase view. Think of temperature again. If you walk from a cool room into a warm garden, what your skin and nerves register is not the absolute number in degrees, but the contrast between before and now. If the entire environment, your body included, were heated or cooled by the same amount, leaving all differences intact, your nervous system would have no way to detect that global shift. The story is the same with brightness, taste, even emotions. We feel contrasts, gradients, accelerations. Our nervous system is wired as a derivative machine, and so are our best scientific instruments. In the language of phi, this sensitivity to differences appears mathematically as what physicists call gauge invariance. The idea is simple. If you add the same constant phase to phi everywhere, all the derivatives, all the differences, remain exactly the same. Because those differences are what define the observable world, nothing physically detectable has changed. When we write things down on paper, we might say in symbols that phi goes to phi plus a constant, and every physically relevant quantity stays fixed. For an audio version, you can think of it this way. There is a knob that rotates the entire cosmic clock hand by some angle, and nature simply does not care about the position of that knob. It is free. This also helps us talk more clearly about the quantities we have already named. When I say omega, I mean the rate of change of phi with respect to time. If we were to write that as an equation, we would say in words, omega equals the time derivative of phi. That just means take phi at a point now, take phi at the same point a tiny moment later, subtract them, and see how rapidly that difference grows as the time step shrinks. When I say k, I mean the spatial gradient of phi. In words, k is the rate at which phi changes as you move in space. Take phi here, take phi a tiny step to the right, subtract, and divide by the size of that step. Do that in every direction, and you have the full vector k telling you which direction phi increases fastest. When I say v, I mean the phase velocity of the pattern. In symbolic form, one might say v equals omega divided by the magnitude of k squared multiplied by the vector k. Spoken in plain language, that says, take the time rate of change, divide it by how sharply phi changes in space, and aim your motion along the direction where phi rises fastest. That choice defines a path along which the phase of the pattern stays constant, a path where the feature you are following does not change its phase as you move. This single relationship already captures the triunity of time, space, and motion. Time shows up as omega, the time derivative of phi. Space shows up as k, the spatial gradient. Motion shows up as v, the path along which those two balance so that the phase of the feature remains unchanged. You do not need to remember the numerical details. What matters is the structural insight. Motion arises from the way time change and space change fit together in the field. There is no extra ingredient. Let us also deepen the picture of space as pattern. When we say K is the spatial pattern of phi, we are really saying that the entire structure of what we call geometry is encoded in how phi varies across the universe. If in some region the pattern of phi is uniform and flat, then distances and directions there behave in a simple, almost Euclidean way. If in another region the pattern is twisted and curved, then moving in what feels like a straight line according to the local pattern might bring you back to your starting point or cause trajectories to bend around some central motif. In the full holophase theory, this intuition is made precise by deriving an effective metric, a way of measuring intervals, directly from relationships between omega and k. But for the listener, the core idea is that the shape of space is not independent of phi. It is written by phi using its own variations as ink. The same goes for time. Regions with different omega landscapes can experience dramatically different effective flows of time. Close to a massive object, for example, the phase pattern could be such that the local ticking of phi is slower relative to far away. From within the theory, there is not a magical time dilation rule imposed from above. It is just a fact about how the field chooses to distribute its rhythmic energy. In this way, the holophase picture weaves together ideas from relativity, field theory, and information into one unified language. It is worth pausing for a moment on the emotional impact of this view. If everything is patterned in phi, then nothing is really isolated. Even when you feel alone, you are literally made of the same continuous field as the air you breathe, the chair you sit on, and the stars above you. The differences that make you you are differences in the pattern of that field, not in its underlying substance. That can be a comforting thought. You are not alien to the universe, you are a natural self-articulation of it. It can also be a sobering thought. Your actions, your choices, the way you live, all feed back into the same fabric that you are made from. In this landscape, ethics and meaning are no longer about ghosts and separate souls. They are about patterns and their interactions. A cruel act is a pattern that damages or destabilizes other intricate patterns in the field. A kind act is a pattern that supports or enriches them. When communities form, you can think of them as large-scale patterns of phase relations that arise when many individual motifs begin to coordinate. Culture, language, technology, even this audio episode you are listening to are emergent structures in phi, built layer upon layer on the basic derivative alphabet. From a scientific perspective, the phi closed view also changes how we think about explanation. We no longer imagine laws as foreign commands written in a separate realm of pure mathematics and then somehow applied to physical stuff. Instead, we see laws as compressed stories about how phi and its derivatives actually behave. When we discover a new equation that accurately predicts experimental results, what we have really found is a more efficient way of summarizing a segment of the holophase's own script. The better the summary, the more compactly it encodes the relevant patterns. Measurement, in this picture, is not the intrusion of a mysterious observer, but the interaction of patterns. A detector, a lens, a human brain, these are all phi patterns set up in such a way that incoming phi patterns leave a stable trace. That trace might be a click in a photodiode, a grain on a photographic plate, or a memory in your mind. In each case, one pattern in the field imprints itself on another. The derivative atlas tells us what kinds of imprints are possible, how noisy they will be, and how much information can be transferred. If you imagine zooming out very far, this entire universe of patterns could be pictured, metaphorically, as a single vast sentence being written and rewritten without end. There is no author outside the sentence. Phi is both the language and the act of writing. The derivative atlas is the grammar. Dynamics is the style in which the sentence tends to flow. And each local phenomenon, from a snowflake forming to a child learning to speak, is a clause or phrase in that cosmic text. As you listen to these words, you can let this image blur into something softer and more visceral. You can notice that every sound entering your ears, every thought arising in your mind, is one more ripple in phi. You are not just hearing about the holophase, you are made of it, moved by it, and using it to understand itself. That recursive loop, where the field gives rise to a pattern that can name the field, is one of the most beautiful aspects of this ontology. So, in this part of episode 6, we have walked through the philosophy of living in a phi closed universe. We began with the simple idea that the world cares about differences, not absolutes. We saw that phi is defined only up to a global rotation, and that all the meaningful quantities, like omega, k, and v, are built from its derivatives. We reimagined time as the local ticking rate of phi, space as the pattern of phi across the universe, and motion as the transportation of phase features. We saw substances become patterns, identities become motifs in a single cosmic rug, and laws become summaries of the field's own behavior. And we realized that there is no outside to this story. The universe is one field speaking itself into complexity. In the next part, we will tighten our focus. We will look directly at the triunity of time, space, and motion. We will unpack, slowly and carefully, how omega, k, and v interlock as three aspects of a single structure, and how that triunity shows up in everything from the path of light to the feeling of moving through the world. For now, you can rest in the simple, luminous idea that when you look out at the night sky, when you listen to music, when you feel your own heartbeat, you are witnessing the same field, phi, dancing in different modes. You are not separate from that dance. You are one of its steps.